Would you say I have a plethora?
A what?
A plethora.
Oh, yes. You have a plethora.
Oh, man, we just had a mini show just now, yo. But it's off
For
the
our
record.
ears only.
Interesting stuff. But what up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Gym Report. I'm your host, Pablo, and joining me, as always, is Mr. Brian Schultz. WB, the latest. We have been getting in a plethora of headlines back to back, and just it's hard to sort of cover this because we speak about it before these announcements happens, and then we're sort of, I guess, further confirm certain situations that we discuss regarding what WB wants to do, who do they want to sell to. So again, I'm coming from a perspective, I haven't done all the research. I just want to talk about it simply as a person who just found out and wants to discuss the next steps.
Yeah.
So, because again, we just two dudes talking about this stuff. That's it. That is it. What's the latest, Brian?
Three quick things. This won't be as long, I think, as some of the prior shows because we've broken down a lot of the what ifs, but three notables. So, number one, Paramount has amended its bid, and even though they technically haven't raised the bid, one could argue the amendment is adding some value. So this goes to my point of when you see the bids in a situation like this where there's a competition for an asset, you typically need to go a few rounds to get to the finish line, which means the final structure of the winning bid will look a little different than what you've seen at the start. So here comes Paramount with trying to address a specific question, which has been, how involved is Larry Ellison in this deal with his personal money? Because he technically only is putting forth $12 billion of the consortium's offer of $30 per share of cash. Mm-hmm. So one of the pushbacks that Warner Brothers has had is, you say he's all in, but where's the money at? Like, it's not all in. We don't see it.
Yeah.
So they amended the offer where Larry Ellison publicly puts a personal guarantee for $40 billion now. And he puts some conditions on his own trust in which he holds his Oracle shares, which are the bulk of his personal wealth, to basically say, like, that trust is locked. It's irrevocable for decades. The money's there. It can't go anywhere. It is backstopping the bid. Yeah. Now, remember, Paramount Skydance is very small. So they have to have that backstop. They're not big enough to compete with Netflix's hundreds of billions of market cap otherwise. So they've put that forward as the first sort of sweetener. And WB has a fiduciary duty to now examine that. You said who they want to, it's clear who they want to sell to. They want to sell to Netflix, right? The board and David Zaslav want to sell to Netflix. That is not a secret at this point. Yeah. The question is whether they can justifiably do that, meaning is there another offer that can force them effectively or pull enough shareholders to change the outcome? So for right now, my expectation would be the board will reject the amended offer. Because if you look at Paramount's been bidding, they're the only company that's been bidding every step of the way, right? Their first bid was $19 a share a couple months ago. That's what started this whole thing. So every step along the way, Warner Brothers comes up with a new thing they have to jump through, new hoop. Mm-hmm. Paramount keeps going because they want the asset. And Warner Brothers knows they want the asset. So my expectation is they'll reject this ultimately. But at some point, if you keep amending and ultimately it sounds like Paramount is willing potentially to raise their bid in terms of value, Netflix will probably have to respond as opposed to just sit with what they have.
Didn't they reject it?
No, they rejected the $30 a share.
Okay.
There's the amended offer, which came in the last 24 hours.
Okay.
Technically, that has to be evaluated and reevaluated. My expectation is that will be rejected as well.
Can they just say no and not give a reason, or will they give a reason as to why they're rejecting these offers?
They'll give a reason. So they will continue to either question the legitimacy of the backstop. I think they have had regulatory questions about the degree of Middle Eastern financing in this. So those could be subject to different regulators and rules, and that could slow the deal. So they can have other questions. And underneath, though, the real reason is they just don't want to be in bed with Paramount, which they clearly do not. But I think if you start, at some point, if Paramount says, fine, Larry Ellison in for a penny, in for a pound, our bid is now 33. Our bid is now 35. There is a point at which Netflix can't just stand pat because now their bid becomes increasingly inferior. Yeah. And so that's why I mean, at some point to get this over the finish line, maybe it'll be regulators weigh in and say, Netflix, you got to do this with CNN or whatever. Like something will change here in order for Netflix to win or for Paramount to win. Like we haven't seen the final structure. This was just the first bit of that. The second thing, we talked about one of our shows, The Guilds, how mad the guilds were about Netflix.
For those viewers who know what I'm talking about, that is what's happening now. We talked about this, yo. Go ahead, the guild.
The guilds are organizing walkouts and strikes around Netflix potentially owning Warner Brothers. It's interesting they're not framing that as a Paramount thing. This goes to my point of like, even though the math says Paramount's going to cut a ton of jobs, there is the perception because Paramount and Skydance are a legacy studio unto themselves, they will be more faithful to the existing model, whereas Netflix will be more disruptive. We called it the Moneyball moment for Hollywood.
Adapt or die.
And as a result, the guilds are out in force trying to stop this and saying, we're not going to work with you. We're not going to work for you. We're going to boycott all things Netflix until you guys walk away. So, we knew from the initial statements where they stood and now trying to put together some action to vote with their feet against this deal if they can.
What ultimately do you think you see as far as this arriving at its final stage of completion? And we talked about the time frame to early 2027 latest. Do you see that going
I think early 27 is like in the fairway. It could go longer than that.
Okay.
Yeah, angle. What are the angles here? 2 that I see. Number 1 is exactly that. The forces that don't want this deal to go through could argue that if they can drag this out long enough, if they can get this into the courts, if they can force sort of Netflix and or Paramount, quite honestly, to jump through enough hoops, they could look at it as we want to see if we can push this entire process past the end of the current administration, because under a new administration, perhaps they might handle this differently and have different incentives and different motivations. That is certainly a possible angle here. So when you say early 27, I think there are people who actually have November 28 circled and are kind of saying, can we get this thing all the way past that? And then we would have potentially new people in the regulatory seats making decisions. Mm-hmm. So that's a factor. I think the more topical one for the guilds is actually simpler. They're hoping to extract guarantees and commitments from Netflix to do certain things. And they're hoping to actually have those be not just commitments that they make in terms of statements, but actually things that they agree to as terms of the deal. So that would be formalized. You say you're deeply committed to theatrical. The deal structure that is approved by the regulators now has to say you will release 30 films in theaters for this many screens with this theatrical window for this many years. That's the kind of thing they're looking for. They're looking for hard and fast guarantees that Netflix won't fully moneyball this thing the second they close the deal. That's what the guilds, I think, are really playing for. We want to stink the joint out and say, you need us to build content. We need you to play ball in terms of how you distribute that content. We got to figure out something that works for everyone in that capacity. That's what the strike would be going after here in the here and now.
Do you think there'll be some negotiation as to, again, we talked about efficiencies and how things and how money gets distributed?
Oh, it's all about that. Yes, absolutely.
So Netflix will have to sort of in detail show how things would change and how much more, uh, I guess, participants stand to gain in this new sort of economy, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's a debate, right? I mean, in fairness, like Netflix would also counter some of this by saying, hey, look how much original content we produce relative to other places. Like we are creating jobs and we are greenlighting projects that would not happen at a traditional studio because of our model, right? So that's their counter, right? And I think that's actually fair, right? There are a number of things that exist on Netflix that a traditional studio would never have made because they would not have seen it as viable for the theater. And Netflix says it works great for us in a streaming capacity. So we give you budget, you got a cast, you got a crew, those are jobs, and we have a product and you have an audience and there's money to be made on the back of that. That's money that wouldn't have been there if we weren't here to have our model. That's the debate, right? So the guilds, I think, are saying, look, they're not head in the sand. They know the world is moving, but they're trying to resist that. They don't want everything to, they don't, like we said the other time, like Netflix would be like, we own Batman. We can do whatever the hell we want with Batman. We can put Batman on the service. He doesn't have to go to the theater anymore.
That's crazy.
So the guilds are saying like, we need to protect a middle ground there of like, yeah, we want you to make a lot of original content. But like right now, for example, what is Backend on a streaming movie? I don't think anyone really knows. Like, whereas, Scarlett Johansson says, I'm getting points on Batman Part 2 because it's going to the theater, 4,000 screens. It might make $1 billion, $1.2 billion. Like, that's more understood as to what that looks like economically. So I think that's where, a lot of
They would
this
have to that obviously, they're going to raise prices, right?
Oh, well, that's why consumers lose, right? When there's less competition. We know that. Yeah.
They're going to have to raise prices. We're going to get these tiered. I think we already have these tiered Netflix subscriptions, right? Where the ads are in there.
Yeah, but I think, so yes, most streamers have an ad and an ad free. But I think with Netflix, you're heading more toward, I said, the old legacy cable model, which is, remember, you had basic cable, you had sports cable, you had premium cable, and you paid different beyond that. Now, if you think like Netflix is going to have HBO and they're going to have Discovery and then they're going to have legacy Netflix, think about when you go into the app, right? There'll be an HBO section or a button. And if you don't pay extra, you don't get to open that section. That's how that's going to work, right? And Batman's probably going to be hidden behind the Warner Brothers section. So if you don't pay the extra, you don't get to see the DC stuff. Like that's how they're going to do it to maximize their dollars and maximize their audience.
And they have to sort of outline this.
Yeah, but Netflix knows, like, it'd be like saying, do you think Ted Sarandos would want to do a film with Christopher Nolan? Of course he would. Like, of course he would, right? Right now he can't. And Chris Nolan would never work with him because of the lack of support for theatrical. Of course, but if you said, does Netflix not want to be in the Chris Nolan business? No, they want to be in the Chris. They buy the license for his movies, and Tenet's on Netflix right now. Like, but they need to find
that theatrical piece is how would I say, at the forefront of discussions.
Of course it is, but it's at the forefront for more reasons than we think of it in terms of distribution and box office. But there's so many other things at stake. Like, imagine a world where Netflix, because they are the behemoth streamer and they want to keep everything captive on the platform, decide we're going to put all productions through something like the volume. So there will never be a set built for a Netflix project ever again. Think about the jobs that go into set creation, carpentry, painting, design. And now Netflix has disintermediated all of that and said everything goes through the volume. It's little stuff like that I think the guilds are very sensitive to, right? They're looking at those risks. And Netflix sitting there saying like, yeah, but it's more content. I'm giving you more jobs because of more content. And they're like, yeah, but the types of jobs are changing and the way we make money off those jobs is changing and we can't have all that, right? So there's a lot of things beyond just the basics here, but the basics are part of it and they're high profile, which is how do stars monetize being stars? How do films get shown to audiences? And where can you go to get access to that product, right? As you said, it's like if Netflix were to buy a chain of theaters and say every piece of IP we control is only going to be distributed to a Netflix theater, and you can't go to an AMC anymore to see it because AMC hates Netflix and hasn't shown their stuff for years. Like, that's also a thing that will, people will not be happy with.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of subplots to this, but the guild's mobilizing to stall this, to delay it, to change it is something that we probably expected, and they are wasting no time in getting going.
Does the deal to you starting to sound a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say the word desperation from Paramount. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah, Desperation from Paramount? Are you kidding me? Yeah.
Right? It's like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
but I think the benefit, because here's the thing, man. Netflix disrupted a lot, and they continue to do so. I'm interested in the details of how this new structure will look like. I mean, we can speculate all we want.
Yeah, we've tried to do that in some of the past shows, right? Because they won't tip their hand on all of that until the deal is closed.
Of course. And right now, it doesn't matter.
And
we
the
got to
guilds
close
are
this
trying
deal.
to force them to tip their hand, right? The guilds are partly saying, you before you even think about doing that thing that we know you're thinking about,
we need
want
to know what's going to happen.
that you're not.
Yes.
That's what it is.
How this not necessarily changes, but the gradual change, the details of how this evolves to somewhere where everybody's in utopia.
Yeah,
I'm interested in seeing what that looks like.
Protracted, though. This is why I went to when we were, and I'll bring it back to DC real briefly here. That's why I kind of scoffed at the James Gunn got a 6-month contract extension. Because I was like, this ain't no 6-month game here that's being played. So to me, the difference between his contract expiring October 1st of next year and spring of 27 basically covers Man at Tomorrow. It doesn't really cover anything else.
It's a second chance. That's what he's getting.
Is it though? I mean, he's basically, I think it's just practically speaking, Warner Brothers as a company was doing the separation next fall. Now they have this deal to contend with that's not going to be resolved. And he's got Man at Tomorrow basically going in front of the camera and wanting to come out in 27. So they extended the contract so that basically it covers Man at Tomorrow. To me, there's no vote of confidence there. It says nothing about the long term. It is, you could actually argue it is a little odd that Warner Brothers signed DeLuca and Abdi to a multi-year extension earlier this year and then only gave Gunn 6 months. Although I will say the multi-year extension occurred before the bids were in, right? Warner Brothers didn't know they were going to be selling when they gave the re-up. So it's hard to say, but it is, to me, Warner Brothers is definitely keeping options open on the leadership and direction of the DCU by only extending him to the spring. And so functionally, it really, to me, doesn't matter. And I've kind of contended, increasingly the tea leaves to me on either side of this sort of suggest he's not going to be running DC once the deal is consummated. But it also is not great for us in the meantime because it definitely, a protracted process means limbo, right? And limbo kind of means it's tough to get big new things off the ground and going.
But he does, and I guess we'll talk about it in another episode. Or I don't know what other topics you want to dive deeper toward in regards to.
I got on the deal. I got one.
Okay.
Who was bidder C? So in the filing about the history of the merger filed with the SEC, required by every deal, it talks about the stages of bidding, and it identifies Paramount, Skydance. They're named. It identifies Netflix. They are named because their bids are public. It does not identify Comcast by name, but you know who it is based upon the profile. They are bidder B.
Okay.
But there's a bidder C mentioned. There was another bid that never made it to press and no one talked about by a, quote, American media company. So it was not Sovereign Wealth. And that company proposed a different structure, which would have been a much more Hollywood-friendly structure just by its nature. This company wanted to buy the networks and wanted to buy only a 20% stake at some valuation, which we don't know, in the studio and the streamer. So at 20%, they would not have had control. They would not have been able to change the model of Warner Brothers, but they would have infused Warner Brothers with cash at presumably a much higher valuation.
Mm-hmm.
Warner Brothers deemed the bid, quote, not actionable at the time, and no other details are provided. But it certainly begs the question as this plays out, who else really was at the table? And who else, maybe they try to resurface as a white knight down the road to say, hey, you got all these disruptive deals that are total control and changing the model. What about one where Warner Brothers gets to be quasi-independent, but they're backed and influenced by us and have a much bigger war chest of cash? Who might that have been? Look, I mean, when you say American Media Company, that list is real short in terms of who's big enough, right? So it's kind of like, I don't define Amazon purely as a media company, but they certainly qualify size-wise. You know who qualifies and crossed my mind was Google. We never talked about it. But Google, with the ownership of YouTube, technically would be considered a large American media company. Is it possible Google threw in a bid, at 20%? Apple, right? So we don't know who that company is. We don't know if that company still cares.
Yeah.
But I point out the structure because the structure would have left Warner Brothers and Zaslav in charge. 20%, you're not running things at 20%. That's not a controlling interest, but you are providing money to backstop it. Interesting angle. Still think it's possible. There's another company out there at the 11th hour as this drags on who might see the board and say, I see, Nicolas Cage and National Treasure. Sandusky, I see door number 3 and I'm taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
You want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, we can wrap this. So that's kind of where we're at. And as I said, there'll be more rounds of this, more posturing.
More details.
Yeah, that's the thing. Both sides are out, right? Like the head of Redbird Capital, who's part of the Paramount Consortium, he was on the Town podcast the other day, pitching the Paramount side of it. And he was making the statement, which I guess is mathematically not inaccurate. He said, Paramount's done more for Warner Brothers shareholders in 6 months than David Zaslav did in 3 years. If you look at where the price was before they started the bidding and where it is now.
Yeah.
So they're all politicking, man. They're all politicking for this. So
I never asked this question, and I think it's probably obvious. But I wrote on Threads, Paramount needs WB to complete. Netflix needs WB to expand. Is that a accurate statement?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, like Paramount's a small studio, right? So this is a business of scale, hence all the consolidation. So Warner Brothers offers you scale, and they offer you brand and reach. And Paramount, post the Skydance merger, needs more of that. Netflix needs content, as you say, expand, right? They need content. They don't have control of enough high demand content. Netflix has not been able to build its own Star Wars, build its own, right? Like Disney had Disney to start. But what did Disney do? They bought Marvel. They bought Star Wars. They bought content in a different time.
Yeah.
Netflix needs high demand content to have the weight, the leverage, and the reason for people to subscribe and pay more over time. That's what they need. That's the expansion you're talking.
Yeah, let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of the latest, and I'm sure it will change after this. But I think things are probably a little bit quieter right now because of the holidays and stuff, but things will ramp up for sure.
Depends where David Zaslav is spending the holidays and who he's spending it with. So
yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, let us know in the comment section below. Once again, hit that like and subscribe, share with your friends. And remember, if you haven't heard it anywhere else, you heard it here first on the Nerd Gen Report.